For a very long time, many people have wondered what cowboys ate during the cattle drive era. But the real story is more fascinating and far more captivating than what Hollywood would have you believe. Their meals were products of necessity, shaped by these harsh realities on the trail. So, what did cowboys really eat? Join us as we uncover the surprising reality of the cultural influence that defined their meals. Food, a means of overcoming hunger. The cowboy, that iconic figure of resilience and independence, did not emerge alone. His legacy is deeply entwined with the Mexican vaquero, whose traditions shaped not just cowboy culture, but the very foods that sustained it. The vaquero emerged in the 16th century on the haciendas of New Spain, which we now call Mexico. Spanish colonizers brought cattle and horses to the Americas, and by the 1600s, vaqueros, often mestizo or indigenous horsemen, were mastering the art of cattle herding. These skilled riders developed techniques for roping, branding, and driving livestock across vast landscapes. Their food, born of necessity, was simple: beans, cornmeal, dried meat, and whatever the land provided. When Spain's influence spread north into modern-day Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California, vaqueros brought their culinary traditions with them. By the 19th century, after the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848, these territories became part of the United States. Anglo-American settlers, drawn by the promise of land and cattle, learned ranching from vaqueros. Many early cowboys were either Mexican or worked alongside vaqueros, adopting their tools, such as the lasso and chaps, and also their recipes. The vaquero's diet, built for mobility and survival, became the foundation for cowboy cuisine. Dishes like chili-spiked stews, tortillas, and jerky were not just practical. They were a cultural exchange passed from one generation of horsemen to another. Geography and climate played a huge role in what cowboys ate. The American West was far from fertile farmland, and its landscape featured harsh deserts, expansive plains, and rocky mountains. Fresh produce was rare, and supply towns could be hundreds of miles away. In this harsh environment, cowboys relied on the vaqueros' knowledge of resilient food staples. Beans and cornmeal, staples of Mexican cuisine, were lightweight and long-lasting. Dried beef or venison, inspired by vaquero cecina, provided essential protein during the long rides. Wild plants like onions or prickly pear, used by vaqueros, added variety when supplies ran low. But the story gets more interesting. Now, before we go any further, if you are enjoying this and you love stories about the Old West, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss an update. In the 19th century, the West's resources shaped a sparse but resourceful pantry. Cattle served as the primary source of protein, with beef forming the backbone of the diet, while wild game like deer or rabbits supplemented meals when available. Corn, widely grown in the Southwest, was ground into meal or masa and used in a variety of preparations. Spices like chilies, a staple in vaquero cooking, added heat and flavor. As Anglo-American influence grew, canned goods and flour gradually made their way into the cowboys' provisions. But the core ingredients, beans, corn, and dried meat, remained rooted in the culinary tradition passed down by the vaqueros. The cowboys' world was born from the vaqueros' legacy, forged in the rugged West where survival demanded ingenuity and resilience. Their shared foods were simple, hearty, and portable, that laid the foundation for a cuisine as enduring as the trails they traveled. Let us now dive into these essential staples, exploring how they fueled the American West and also carried the flavors of the vaquero tradition. Stay tuned. Beans. The cowboy's fuel. Beans were the undisputed king of cowboy cuisine, a culinary inheritance directly from the vaqueros of New Spain. Known as frijoles in Spanish, beans, especially pinto or red kidney varieties, were cheap, lightweight, and could stay in a sack for months without spoiling. For vaqueros herding cattle across the vast haciendas of colonial Mexico, beans were a dietary cornerstone, packed with protein and fiber to sustain long hours on horseback. When Anglo-American cowboys took up ranching in the Southwest, they adopted this staple with enthusiasm, calling them cowboy beans or prairie beans coal for the energy they provided. Preparation was straightforward but versatile. Vaqueros taught cowboys to soak dried beans overnight when time allowed, then simmer them in a cast-iron Dutch oven over a campfire. To enhance the nutritional value, they might add a chunk of bacon, salt pork, or even beef drippings, while onions, garlic, or dried chilies are hallmarks of Mexican cooking for flavor. On the trail, improvisation was key. Wild herbs, a touch of molasses, or a pinch of chili powder, echoing vaquero recipes for spicy stews, might be added to suit the taste and availability. The result was a hearty dish that could feed a whole crew from a single pot, often paired with tortillas or biscuits. Beans were not just practical, they were cultural glue, a symbol of cross-cultural exchange that defined the cowboy cuisine. Cornmeal, the versatile staple. Cornmeal was another enduring contribution from the vaquero tradition, deeply rooted in the ancient Mesoamerican tradition of maize. In Mexico, vaqueros ground corn into masa for tortillas or atole, a warm, porridge-like drink that offered comfort and sustenance on cold mornings. As Anglo-American cowboys began learning from their Mexican counterparts, they adapted cornmeal into their own trail-friendly dishes. Cornbread, mush, and hoe cakes. Lightweight and easy to store, cornmeal quickly became a staple chuck wagon essential, providing carbohydrates for energy when protein was scarce. Cornbread, typically baked in a Dutch oven or skillet over an open flame, became a favorite among the cowboys. Following the vaqueros method, they were shown how to mix cornmeal with water, salt, and a bit of lard for a dense, golden loaf that paired perfectly with beans or chili. When time was short or supplies were low, cowboys made mush, a quick porridge of cornmeal boiled with water, sometimes sweetened with sugar or flavored with bacon grease. For a quicker, portable option, they fried cornmeal batter into hoe cakes, flat, crispy pancakes cooked on a skillet, a direct descendant of the vaquero tortilla. Cornmeal's versatility made it invaluable on the trail. It filled gaps when meat ran low, and its mild flavor absorbed the spices of vaquero-inspired stews. Nutritionally, it balanced the cowboy diet, delivering quick energy for long rides. In camp, the smell of cornbread baking was a morale booster, a taste of home in the wilderness. Vaqueros, too, cherished corn for its cultural weight, tying them to indigenous traditions. For cowboys, cornmeal bridged worlds, Mexican, native, and Anglo, into a distinctly Western cuisine. It was a reminder of the shared heritage and enduring spirit of the trail. Dried meat, the trail's lifeline. When fresh meat was unavailable, dried meat, especially jerky, became the cowboys' most reliable source of nourishment. This preservation technique came straight from the vaqueros, who dried beef into cecina, thin strips of sun-dried or smoke-dried beef to last through long cattle drives. Cowboys redefined the technique, salting and air-drying strips of beef or venison until they were tough as leather but packed with protein. The process was simple and effective. Thin slices of meat were rubbed with salt and hung in the sun or placed over a low smoky fire. Following the vaqueros' tradition, sometimes they added chiles or spices, a trick cowboys adopted to bring variety to their monotonous plain jerky. Jerky was the ultimate trail food, light, portable, and nearly indestructible. Cowboys often chewed it on horseback or soaked it in water to soften it for stews. On lean drives, it might be the only protein available for days. Vaqueros had used similar methods for centuries, drying whatever game or cattle they could spare. In the Southwest, where vaquero and cowboy crews often worked side by side, jerky was a shared staple, sometimes spiced with chili to add warmth during the cold nights on the open range. Beyond beef, cowboys hunted deer, antelope, or even buffalo, drying the meat to supplement their meat supplies. This mirrored vaquero practices of using local resources, like wild game or stray cattle, to sustain themselves. Nutritionally, jerky's high protein content was critical for muscle recovery after days of roping and riding. It also carried cultural weight. For vaqueros, drying meat was a craft passed down through generations, while cowboys saw it as a symbol of self-reliance. But it did not end there. A day in life, meals on the trails. On the dusty trails of the American West, meals were far more than just food. They were moments of respite, vital fuel for survival, and often the only chance to connect. Cowboys worked from sunup to sundown, herding cattle across endless plains, and their meals had to match the rhythm of their rugged lives. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner each served a purpose, shaped by the same Vaquero traditions that defined their tools and techniques. From hearty morning biscuits to quick trail snacks and communal evening stews, Cowboy meals carried the flavors of the Mexican vaqueros who taught them how to eat on the range. So, let us sit down at the Cowboys' table and explore a day in their culinary life. What Cowboys ate for breakfast. Mornings on the trail started early, often before dawn, with the lowing of cattle and the crackle of a rekindled campfire. Breakfast was the Cowboys' foundation, packed with protein and carbohydrates to sustain the long day ahead. The Vaquero influence was strong here. In Mexico, vaqueros began their days with hearty foods like frijoles and tortillas, often paired with strong coffee brewed over flames. Cowboys adapted this, replacing tortillas with sourdough biscuits, but keeping the spirit of a simple, nourishing meal. A typical breakfast featured sourdough biscuits baked in a Dutch oven with a recipe passed down from Vaquero cooks who used simple dough. These dense, golden rounds were slathered with bacon grease or dipped in gravy, made from pan drippings and flour, a Cowboy twist on Vaquero sauces. Bacon or salt pork sizzled in a skillet, its fat saved for cooking later meals, a trick learned from Vaqueros who stretched every resource. Coffee, brewed black and strong in a battered pot, was non-negotiable, a Vaquero tradition that became the Cowboy's lifeblood. A cowboy might say, "Coffee so strong, it'll wake the dead," a nod to its role in shaking off the morning chill. For variety, some crews fried eggs from chickens carried on the chuck wagon or added hash, a mix of chopped meat and onions, reminiscent of Vaquero dishes like picadillo. These rich protein meals were critical, providing energy for hours in the saddle. The Vaqueros' influence lingered in the spices, chiles or wild herbs, sometimes spiced up the gravy, a taste of the Southwest in every bite. What made up Cowboys' lunch? Lunch on the trail, often called trail lunch, was a fleeting affair, eaten on the move or during a brief pause. Cowboys could not linger because cattle drives demanded constant motion. During these midday hours, the Vaqueros' portable foods shone. Vaqueros, accustomed to long days in the saddle, had perfected the art of eating on the go, often carried tortillas, jerky, or dried fruit, tucked into saddlebags for quick bites. Cowboys quickly adopted these practices, relying on foods that did not need cooking or could be grabbed from the chuck wagon. There's more to this story. Jerky was the undisputed centerpiece of the Cowboys' trail lunch. The dried beef, or venison, perfected by Vaqueros as cecina, was a staple. Tough but protein-packed, it was chewed slowly on horseback. Its salty flavor curbed hunger and kept the Cowboys going. Alongside it, Cowboys often carried hardtack, a rock-hard biscuit made from flour and water. Though it originated from Anglo traditions, it served the same purpose as Vaquero flatbreads. It was portable and indestructible. Depending on availability, some Cowboys carried cheese or a leftover biscuit from breakfast. When time allowed, a quick stop at the chuck wagon might yield a tortilla or a slice of cornbread, often smeared with bacon grease for extra calories. These meals were about efficiency, not comfort. Vaqueros had long mastered the art of eating light while working, and Cowboys learned to do the same. A cowboy might munch jerky while scanning the horizon for stray cattle, just as a Vaquero once did on the plains of Mexico. The simplicity of lunch kept the drive moving, with the promise of a heartier meal at day's end. Meals. Cowboys ate as dinner. Dinner was the Cowboys' reward, a time to gather around the campfire after a long day. This was when the chuck wagon's cook, often inspired by Vaquero cocineros, camp cook, worked magic. The Vaqueros' influence was most evident in the hearty one-pot meals that defined cowboy dinners. Stews, like chili con carne or bean-heavy caldo, were direct descendants of Vaquero recipes designed to feed many with minimal fuss. These meals were slow-cooked in a Dutch oven over steady fire. These dishes combined beef, beans, chilies, and wild onions, simmering all day to meld and intensify flavors. Cowboys particularly loved chili for its spice and warmth, a clear nod to the Vaqueros' love of bold, spicy seasonings. Alongside stews, fried meats like steak, venison, or cured pork were another favorite, seared in a heavy skillet with techniques borrowed from Vaquero carne asada. When potatoes were available, which were often traded or foraged, they were fried or boiled, adding substance to the meal. Cornbread or biscuits rounded out the plate, soaking up every drop of stew. These communal dinners were a ritual, with cowboys swapping stories, jokes, or songs over flickering flames. Vaqueros had done the same, their tales of the llano blending with cowboy yarns of stampedes or saloon brawls. The communal aspect was vital. Eating together built trust among a diverse crew, Anglo, Mexican, and sometimes Native American cowboys sharing the same pot. The Vaqueros' tradition of feeding the whole ranch carried over, with the chuck wagon cook serving as the heart of the camp, much like the cocinero on a Mexican hacienda. But here's something interesting: regional variations. The American West was no monolith. Its landscape stretched from the scorching deserts of Texas to the rugged peaks of Wyoming and the fertile valleys of California. For cowboys, food was not just about survival. It was a reflection of the land and the people they shared it with. Across these regions, cowboy cuisine took on distinct flavors shaped by local resources, cultural exchanges, and the ever-present influence of Mexican vaqueros. From spicy Texas chili to Wyoming's game-heavy stews, the cowboy's plate told a story of place and heritage. Let us ride across the West and taste the differences that defined cowboy cooking, all rooted in the vaquero traditions that tied them together. Texas, the heart of vaquero influence. In Texas, the birthplace of the American cowboy, the vaquero's culinary footprint was deepest. This was where Mexican ranching culture thrived before the Mexican-American War, and after 1848, Anglo cowboys inherited a rich tradition of flavors and techniques. The iconic chili con carne, a spicy stew of beef, chiles, and sometimes beans, was a direct descendant of vaquero stews like caldo de res. Vaqueros seasoned their dishes with dried chilies, garlic, and wild herbs, and Texas cowboys embraced this, simmering chili in Dutch ovens for hours to feed hungry crews. The heat of the chilies, red, green, or smoky, carried the vaqueros' love of bold flavors, a taste that became synonymous with Texas. Beans, a vaquero staple, were king in Texas, often cooked with bacon or pork fat and served with tortillas or cornbread, both rooted in Mexican mesa traditions. Carne asada, grilled beef seasoned with chilies and lime, was a vaquero favorite that Texas cowboys adapted into barbecued steaks, cooked over mesquite for a smoky kick. Local resources shaped the plate. Texas longhorn cattle provided abundant beef, while wild onions and peppers foraged from the plains added vaquero-inspired flair. Mexican cooks often worked on Texas ranches, blending their spices with Anglo ingredients like flour for biscuits, creating a fusion that defined the region's cuisine. Cultural exchange was vibrant here. Mexican vaqueros and Anglo cowboys worked side by side, sharing meals that mixed traditions. Native American influences, like the use of local pecans or prickly pear, occasionally appeared in desserts or stews, learned from tribes like the Comanche. Texas cowboy food was hearty, spicy, and communal, a testament to the vaqueros' enduring legacy in the Lone Star State. Wyoming, game and grit in the high plains. Up north in Wyoming, where winters were harsh and settlements sparse, cowboy cuisine leaned heavily on the land's wild bounty. The vaquero influence was less direct here, as Mexican ranching traditions were filtered through Texas and Colorado, but their techniques, drying meat, slow-cooking stews, still shaped the diet. Wyoming cowboys relied on game like venison, elk, or antelope, hunted in the mountains and preserved as jerky, just as vaqueros dried beef into cecina. This high-protein food was critical for surviving the cold and fueling long rides across rugged terrain. Stews were a Wyoming staple, often made with game or beef, thickened with beans or potatoes when available. Vaquero-style, slow cooking in Dutch ovens ensured tough cuts became tender, sometimes flavored with wild sage or onions, a foraging trick learned from vaqueros and Native Americans alike. Cornbread, a nod to vaquero corn-based foods, was common, though Wyoming cowboys often used flour for biscuits, reflecting Anglo-settler influence. Coffee, brewed strong in the vaquero tradition, was a lifeline in the frigid mornings, sipped from tin cups by a fire. But here's something you probably did not know. Native American tribes like the Shoshone or Arapaho contributed to Wyoming's cowboy diet, sharing knowledge of local plants like choke cherries or wild plums, which might be dried or added to stews for sweetness. Anglo settlers brought preserved goods like canned tomatoes or dried apples, which diversified the chuck wagon's pantry. Wyoming's cuisine was rugged and resourceful, blending vaquero techniques with the demands of a harsher climate and the gifts of the land. California, ranchos, and coastal bounty. In California, where Spanish and Mexican ranchos thrived before statehood, vaquero culture was the bedrock of cowboy life. The region's mild climate and fertile land allowed for a richer pantry, but the vaquero's influence remained central. Barbacoa, slow-cooked beef wrapped in leaves and buried in coals, was a vaquero specialty that California cowboys adopted, often using local oak for a distinct flavor. This became the precursor to modern barbecue, with cowboys grilling beef or mutton over open fires. Beans, as in Texas, were a mainstay, often seasoned with chiles, garlic, or cilantro, reflecting the vaquero's Mexican roots. Tortillas, made from corn or wheat, were more common here than biscuits, a direct carryover from rancho kitchens. California's coastal access brought occasional treats like fish or abalone, grilled vaquero style, while its orchards provided dried fruits such as apricots, figs, or raisins that echoed vaquero snacks. Native American tribes like the Chumash shared acorns ground into meal for a nutty bread, blending with vaquero corn traditions. Anglo settlers introduced flour and canned goods, but the vaquero's culinary framework, spicy, grilled, and communal, dominated. California's cowboy cuisine was a vibrant mix, served at sprawling ranch feasts or quick trail meals, always with a nod to the vaquero's rancho heritage, cultural exchanges, and vaquero roots. Across these regions, cowboy food was a melting pot. Vaqueros brought chiles, tortillas, and slow-cooking techniques, while Native Americans added wild plants and game. Anglo settlers contributed biscuits and canned goods, but the vaquero's influence, rooted in centuries of Mexican ranching, tied it all together. Whether in Texas's chili pots, Wyoming's game stews, or California's barbacoa pits, the cowboy's plate was a shared story of adaptation and resilience. From Texas's spicy heart to Wyoming's wild bounty and California's rancho riches, cowboy cuisine reflected the West's diversity. Yet at every campfire, the vaquero's legacy simmered: chilies, beans, and grilled meats, uniting regions and cultures in a flavor as bold as the frontier itself. Myth versus reality. What cowboys ate. The cowboy's diet is often romanticized in Western lore, but the reality, shaped by Mexican vaquero traditions, tells a more practical story. But here comes the shocker. Despite the romantic image, cowboys rarely feasted on fresh steaks during cattle drives. Preserving the herd was crucial, and without refrigeration, meat spoiled quickly. Instead, tough cuts were boiled into stews, while dried beef, cecina, and vaquero-inspired chili kept them going. While chili was iconic in Texas, other regions like Wyoming leaned on plainer fare like beans, biscuits, and wild game due to fewer available spices. Coffee was a staple, brewed strong over open flames, a practice inherited from vaquero camps. But when supplies ran low, cowboys turned to creative substitutes like roasted barley or chicory. Far from bland, their meals were often surprisingly flavorful thanks to chiles, garlic, onions, and herbs gathered along the trail, ingredients introduced through vaquero cooking traditions. Meals were not solitary affairs either. Around the fire, cowboys gathered to share food, stories, and laughter, a legacy of the communal spirit practiced by vaqueros long before the cowboy myth took hold. Cowboy food was more than sustenance. It was a lifeline, a tradition, and a bridge between cultures shaped by vaqueros' roots. From beans and tortillas to the cowboy's chili and jerky, these hearty meals supported life on the range and reflected a blend of Mexican, Native, and Anglo influences. Today, they remind us that food shared around a fire carries stories of resilience and camaraderie. So when you enjoy chili, remember the cowboys and vaqueros who started it all. Thanks for joining us on the culinary trail of cowboys. Now go fix yourself a hearty plate and keep the spirit of the West alive.